What would you do if your Formula One car was failing, and not even the engineers could detect it? What if the only track came from the sensations of a world champion? Today we revealed the mystery that Ferrari took weeks to decipher, but that Hamilton noticed from the first round. It all started with a difficult discomfort to explain, the kind of detail that only a pilot with 7 world titles can perceive. Lewis Hamilton, aboard the new SF25, toured the fast straight in the urban circuit of Baku in what seemed one more race, one more test within its process of adaptation to the Maranello team. This perception did not arise from a single round. It was growing as a deaf discomfort at the bottom of the mind, a feeling that began to consolidate after each stint, after each line in which other cars reached it with an ease that did not coincide with the potential he had felt during the preseason tests. It was not fatigue, it was not a human error. It was something that manifested without being detected by any indicator. From cockpit, Hamilton began communicating that frustration to his engineer. In content tone, but with the firmness that characterizes it, he asked to check the motor maps. He asked if the hybrid mode was active, if the energy deployment remained in line with the programmed. From the wall, the answer was routine. All systems worked correctly. Telemetry showed no anomalies. The numbers coincided. But Hamilton insisted, because he doesn't need numbers to know when a car is not working as he should. You need sensations. And his sensations were clear. There was something broken. With each turn behind the wheel, the suspicion became conviction. There was something hidden within the SF25, something that no engineer had detected, something that telemetry did not want to reveal, an invisible failure that was sabotaging his race weekends from day one, and that maybe only he could feel. That distrust of the machine that should take him back to the top was the beginning of everything. Because when a pilot does not trust his car, he cannot push the limit. And in Formula One, if you don't push the limit, you are out of the fight. But Hamilton is not one of those who surrender to the inexplicable. Instead of adapting to a car that did not respond, he decided to get to the bottom of the problem. Although that means facing their own engineers, the software that validated performance, and to the harsh reality of Ferrari, despite its advances, still dragged systemic errors. This was the real turning point. The moment when Hamilton, more than a pilot, became the detective of his own technical misfortune. And everything began with a simple doubt, a suspicion, a feeling born of the experience of someone who has learned to listen to his car as if it were an extension of his body. After the race in Baku, and with Hamilton's voice echoing in the garage, Ferrari made an unusual decision, executing a complete review of the SF25 hybrid system. In the heart of the hybrid system, specifically in the MGUK, the unit responsible for recovering energy in braking and transforming it into extra power during acceleration, an intermittent drop of 2 kilowatts was detected. A figure that may seem insignificant in a world out of motoring, but that in Formula One is absolutely devastating. That little loss translates into several kilometers per hour less in line. In this sport, where the margins are thousandths, a car without those 2 kilowatts is a car that is condemned to lose positions constantly, regardless of the pilot's ability. But what impacted the team was not the magnitude of the loss. It was the fact that this anomaly had not been registered in real time. There were no alarms, there were no system failure alerts. The sensors said everything was inside parameters. However, the car did not deliver energy as it should. It was a silent, intermittent, and extremely difficult to track. The reason for this invisibility was in the software. The algorithm that manages the energy flow between the MGUK, the batteries, and the thermal engine had a structural failure. A deep bug in the mapping code. Cunning enough to operate within predefined safety thresholds, but defective enough to cut power without being considered a critical situation. This error allowed the system to believe that it was working properly when it was actually delivering energy irregularly. Sometimes the car had all the thrust available, other times simply not. It was like running with a loose cable, invisible in the eyes of the technicians, but that completely altered track behavior. Historical data revealed something even more worrying. The ruling had several races occurring. It was not exclusive to the Azerbaijan GP. From the debut of the SF25 in Australia, there were records of peaks and power falls that now, seen with this new information, fit perfectly into a pattern. Hamilton's car had been competing at a disadvantage since the beginning of the season without anyone knowing. Fred Vasseur, head of the team, communicated it to the public with caution, reducing the problem to an inconsistency in energy recovery. But within the team, the language was very different. In private, what was said was clear. It was a critical vulnerability in the architecture of the hybrid system. Not only did he compromise performance, he also put the thermal reliability of the car at risk. Every time the energy flow was interrupted without control, the complete system suffered stress not foreseen in its design. Internal temperatures shot. The batteries received irregular freight and download peaks. And the thermal engine had to compensate for these losses, forcing a performance for which it was not calibrated. The finding was a very hard blow for the technical team. All the effort in aerodynamics, all simulations, all strategic planning, they were useless if the car's energy heart did not work as it should. And while Leclerc seemed less affected perhaps by a car without that same fault, or perhaps for a driving style that did not expose it so much, Hamilton had been competing with an incomplete tool. In that context, Ferrari opted for a radical design philosophy. The concept behind the SF25 focused on a clear premise: sacrifice tolerance for pure performance. To do this, they aggressively reduced the center of gravity of the car, adjusted the front suspension geometry to maximize the soil effect, and decreased the filming height to almost experimental limits. They wanted the SF25 to stick to the asphalt like a suction cup, to bite each curve with more load than any other car. And in simulations, the idea worked perfectly. The first victim of this extreme design was the structural reliability of the soil. The car became hypersensitive to asphalt changes, to the pianos, to the lateral wind, even to the minimum fuel distribution. A design that promised consistency began to present a return variability after return. And that instability not only affected aerodynamics. The most serious thing was that it triggered unexpected thermal stress in the hybrid system, especially in the MGUK. The kinetic unit of energy recovery, the MGUK, is designed to operate under a very specific thermal and electrical range. When Ferrari lowered the car so much, generated new areas of aerodynamic turbulence and mechanical vibration that had never been considered in the previous models. This caused the airflow to key components to be less efficient, affecting its cooling. And that lack of thermal stability triggered the worst enemy of a hybrid system: erratic behavior. Energy did not flow predictably. The control system, which expected constant values, began to receive variable inputs. And the software, which had been written under the assumption of ideal thermal stability, began to fail. What really happened was a kind of micro disorder between the phases of recovery and energy delivery. The MGUK delivered power when it shouldn't, or disconnected when it was most needed. And he did it without alerting the system, because for the sensors, everything seemed to be within the range. The code was simply not prepared for such real conditions. Ferrari had designed a car too aggressive for the maturity level of his hybrid system. They had created a technical environment that demanded perfection, but in practice, neither hardware nor software were ready to live with that level of demand. It was a vision failure, not execution. They wanted to go beyond the limits of their technology, and in doing so, they crossed an invisible line where maximum performance is transformed into functional instability. But there is an even more revealing second element. The technical team that devised this architecture is no longer exactly the same as the updates. Enrico Cardile, one of those initial responsible for the concept of SF25, left his position at the end of development. His departure left a technical vacuum that is now being filled by different groups within the area of aerodynamics and energy. And although the base design remains yours, those who inherit it now have to face a complex monster, full of unplanned variables and systemic errors that cannot be corrected simply with a software patch. This disconnection between intention and execution is what has sunk the first Ferrari races in 2025. A brilliant car in concept, but fragile in implementation. A design that promised championships, but that in its attempt to be a revolutionary, ended up compromising its functional essence. And in the meantime, Hamilton fights with the consequences. Driving to the limit a car that does not respond the same 2 laps in a row, which can lose power without warning, which punishes each error with a partial disconnection of the hybrid system, is a technical torture. One that only the biggest can support, but also one that can break the trust between pilot and team just when cohesion is needed. What happened in each stint made no sense. The car sometimes pushed hard. Other times, he simply did not respond. And there was no way to know when it would happen. DRS areas, which should normally be trampolines for the attack, became traps. Hamilton could not trust that he would have the extra energy necessary to close a maneuver. Each advancement attempt was an air currency, and each defense an open vulnerability. Leave me your answer in the comments. What would you do if you were Fred Vasseur? Would you rewrite the software from scratch? Would you redesign the full energy flow, or bet on something even more radical? And what do you think of Hamilton's ability to detect a failure that mocked all Maranello's sensors?